So today's guest on the Keen Yoga podcast is Celest Pereira, and she's a trained physiotherapist, a friend of mine, and we've worked together for a number of years now, and a colleague in London. I don't think I ever met you in London, Celeste, but I've worked with you online for a while since, and today we're going to talk about neuroscience and yoga, which is increasingly Celeste's speciality. So welcome, Celeste, to the Keen Yoga podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for coming on. I'm trying to make the intro relatively short. In the end, we'll kind of end up waffling along, and the person says hello 5 minutes later. So I'm going to cut it short. But Celeste has many credentials there, and also, actually, you've got a new book as well. I didn't mention that, or relatively new. I'm going to read that one. It was about too flexible to be safe, or something like that.
Yeah, it's a book about hypermobility, and we called it Too Flexible to Feel Good because often people kind of glorify flexibility, but a lot of people who have excessive amounts of it actually really struggle to feel good in their bodies. And we really wanted people to be like, oh my God, that's me. Like to recognize themselves in the title.
Totally. It's a great title. It actually kind of piques my interest, and it suddenly popped to my mind. I've got to read that book. So I just want to plug that because it sounds, I know the premise, and obviously as yoga teachers, we had many of those people in our classes, and often the most difficult to teach, I have to say, because those people can naturally do the things and they're somewhat rewarded by the general society, or at least the people in the class, for doing those things. And so telling them to back off, or why it might not be a good idea, especially if they don't yet feel in pain, is a somewhat a struggle to convince them that there might be another way of stretching. Anyway, slightly off beam today, because we wanted to talk particularly about pain, not exactly off beam, pain in yoga. But Celeste has a different take on this, somewhat, because apparently pain isn't felt first and foremost in the body. It's felt somewhere else. So I suppose I don't have to admit my ignorance here, Celeste, to say I don't really know much about the subject, and Celeste is hopefully going to educate at least me, and hopefully you as well, listening to this podcast today, a little bit. And Celeste is a super researcher, so we're kind of very confident that she has assimilated as much information as she can on the subject.
Absolutely.
We definitely know that's, I know you're an incredibly digital hard worker. Also, before we start, I just want to refer you to Celeste's podcast. What's that title again, Celeste? Remind me of the title.
It's Love at First Science.
That's it. Yeah, it's another good catchy title. Love at First Science. Loads of good people on. Listen to that. It's a good podcast. I've listened to loads of episodes actually, and I don't usually listen to podcasts. Yoga Land is another one to listen to. That's good.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah. But and I certainly don't listen to my own, so don't worry about that. Right. So first of all, we're going to start at the beginning. Just, pain seems so obvious to everyone. Oh, I feel in pain, but yet so opaque, because sometimes we feel discomfort. People often come back to me and say, well, how do I know pain? What does it feel? I feel discomfort in my asana, in my yoga practice all the time, or they say, well, I don't feel pain. And then it comes out later that they actually do feel pain, but we're so used to feeling pain that we don't even know what pain feels like anymore. So, how would we go about kind of ascertaining what pain looks like for us?
Adam, it's such a vast question. So I want you and your listeners to just take a step back and, first of all, have an open mind, because a lot of what we thought about pain actually has now been disproved through numerous studies. And first and foremost, what we have to remember is that pain is a communication tool, and it's utilized by the brain to help us alter our behavior in some way. What we used to think is that you'll injure something or something will happen to your periphery or your body, and then a pain signal would travel up to your brain, and your brain would then register that you are in pain, and you would feel that area that you have hurt in pain, right? That's kind of the old traditional thinking about how pain works. But what we discovered through, as I mentioned, different studies is that actually what's happening is that we don't have any pain receptors in our body. We actually have something called a threat receptor. And threat signals will be sent all the way up to the brain. And then the brain will make a decision if the threat threshold is enough to elicit a pain response. And again, we have to remember that pain, therefore, is not an input, but rather an output. And outputs can be safety outputs, Pain is one of them. So is dizziness, nausea, fatigue, stiffness and weakness. But you also, let's put a couple more in there. Anxiety, depression, those are all outputs the brain has chosen. But we can also have outputs that I like to call empowering outputs, like run faster, jump higher, bend deeper, but without any injuries, have more control, feel more confident in a stressful environment. Being able to just utilize your body at the highest level without there being any limitations. So both of those categories, it sounds like they're very different and they're very far removed, but they actually fall under the same umbrella. That being that they are outputs the brain has chosen. Now, it's important that I just also flag one more thing to your listeners, that the brain, I'm talking your deep unconscious processing, doesn't care if you're thriving or just surviving. It only cares that you are safe. So what it'll do is utilize these safety outputs, pain, nausea, stiffness, dizziness, fatigue, to slow you down. Because if the signals coming in, your five senses, how your body feels inside, or your proprioception is coming in and it's maybe not the clearest information coming in, or at the level of processing, there's somehow your brain's not processing that information accurately, your brain will feel unsafe giving you an empowered output like run fast or jump high or bend deep. And so it will, what we see is that often people have got no tissue damage and yet they're still in pain. Or sometimes people are riddled with injuries and they have no pain. So there's this dichotomy happening in the research world, which has led us down this path of questioning the old narrative. And now we're at this brilliant threshold of understanding where we recognize that pain is an output, and the same things that can help alleviate your pain are the same variables that can help your performance improve when you're on the mat or you're deciding to run a marathon or play golf, whatever your chosen output would be.
So, but we can't say pain's completely subjective either, because people are going to listen and go, well, if I stick my hand in a fire, I'm going to feel pain, So
it is subjective in the sense that if I had to take someone who trained in the SAS and I asked them to put their hand in the fire, they would probably have a higher threshold to be able to withstand that pain than, let's say, a baby. So it is very subjective. And again, this is where conversations around the biopsychosocial model are so useful, because what it then illustrates is that your subjective experience of pain is very much dependent not only on the biological aspect of something happening, such as a hand heading into a fire, but also how you were brought up and the way that you were potentially either mollycoddled by your parents or maybe completely ignored. Both of those ends of the scale maybe wouldn't have served the individual in the best way possible. But also, if you had a parent who gave you the adequate attention but didn't catastrophize, that would probably get you in good standing to actually handle the pains of life in a better way. But then you also have the psychological element that plays a role. Like if you believe that you are fragile and that your injury is something that cannot heal, or if you believe that you've tried everything. I've tried everything and I still can't get better. Like those types of beliefs are so ingrained in us, particularly in the yoga world, because you hear teachers saying these statements of fragility all the time. That forms, again, the third arm of the biopsychosocial model: the biology, the sociology, the social aspect of it, and the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah, and it's true. I used I don't think I used the example of purpose, but the idea of self-immolation that was a yogic thing to do, right? In some, apparently the certain yogis have done that in the past, right? Just stepped on a pyre and burst into flames and withstood it. And so there must be, something in their mind which could, completely potentially block off the stimulus. So in a sense, it's completely subjective. But what do we do with it now? Then it kind of problematizes it, because do we listen to it? Do we not? How do we relate to it now? And what kind of other factors can we look out for?
I'm really glad you asked this question, because one thing that I don't want your listeners to think is that pain is quote unquote in your head, because how I view that statement is very derogatory in the sense that you've imagined it, you've made it up. And so when I tell people, pain is an output the brain chooses, they'll be like, oh, so I'm just imagining it. Like I'll get that kind of response back. And
Yeah.
I understand why people are saying that, but that isn't what's happening. Pain is not an imagined thing. Pain is a very real safety output that your brain has chosen to keep you safe. There's a difference there. It's not a conscious thing. This is happening on a very, very deep unconscious level. And it's a very important thing because what we see in populations where people have no pain, like those parts of the brain that process pain and produce those outputs have been cut off, or they're not as active, those people have a very short life expectancy. So we know that pain is an integral part of our ability to be a human that's alive and functioning. But at the same time, what can also happen is when people experience chronic pain, the pain centers of the brain can become highly developed. And then the brain will start to produce the output of pain, even if there's nothing wrong, even if there's no threatening stimuli to elicit that pain output. So it's a very complex, and we're still learning a lot. Like I'm speaking like, oh, I know so much about pain, but I really don't. None of us do. It is a highly, highly complex system, which on one hand is so useful and keeping us alive and keeping us safe. And on the other hand is incredibly debilitating. And so we can never try and pinpoint it or marginalize it into one single definition. We have to keep a very open mind when we're dealing with pain, A, within ourselves, and B, also with other people. But one thing that I can say a lot of the studies are producing is that if you are someone who is experiencing pain, believing that your body is resilient to heal is incredibly powerful. And I'll just give you a very esoteric example of what I do in my clinic. So my patient caseload heavily leans towards people that have sustained a concussion. And very often their concussions aren't so severe that they are labeled as they haven't passed out, and they aren't even given the label of concussion at the hospital. They're just told, oh, you hit your head, you'll be fine, just go home. But what we see with their history is that from that event, their life starts to fall apart. They have a lot of pain, dizziness. They have a lot of fatigue, and many of them have to quit their jobs and move back in with their parents. Like it's really sad. And they're often told things like, you're not using your glutes or squeezing your core enough, or, a lot of these old school ways of thinking. And it'll be my job to go in with a very different approach to help rehab them. But one of the things I've found working with this population is that as soon as I add in giving them the task of, whilst they are doing their physiotherapy techniques, to constantly just reiterate, my body is resilient, I am safe, my brain is protecting me, or if they have got pain or dizziness or nausea, whatever that they're experiencing, if they engage with that quote unquote negative sensation, because I don't like to call it negative because it's really just a safety output. If we get them to engage and focus on it and go, thank you for being here, I really appreciate that you're trying to keep me safe. What we see is that the level of intensity on their symptoms falls dramatically. So if they're doing some kind of drill and they start to feel nauseous, and I'm like, just focus on the nausea and say, thank you, I know you're here to keep me safe. If it's level 10, after a minute, they'll be like, oh, it's level 1 now. So it really helps them. Now, I just want to put the caveat in. It doesn't help everybody. Not everybody responds to that. But I've worked with enough people now to recognize the fact that it does work really, really well many of the times. So when you engage with your own body, if you are in pain, it's first of all important to listen and to really go, oh, thank you. You're trying to tell me something and I'm here to listen. Because sometimes what we're doing is not good for us. Sometimes the daily Ashtanga practice is not serving us, but we've been so drilled into us that we have to show up on the mat, or we're a bad yogi, that maybe we keep going and we keep pushing. And actually, if you just take a moment and go, oh, my body's trying to tell me something, like, hey, body, what are you trying to tell me? Oh, maybe I should just not go as hard in class today, or maybe I can skip a day. And then engage with the pain on that level that I've been suggesting of going, you are resilient, you will heal from this. And I promise I'll do everything in my power to help your healing process. When people approach their rehab with this frame of mind, we do see them get better faster.
Yeah. It seems that there's kind of two paradigms going on, you see. That either people don't usually acknowledge the pain in the early stages, and right, so there's this kind of lack of tuning in or kind of saying, well, something's going on here that's trying to tell me something. And then at a later stage, when it's an injury, then there's this kind of absolute terror around it. That's like, well, any kind of possible sign of any pain. It's like, okay, I can't do that. I can't go there anymore. And and there's a great fear.
Can I ask you something? Can I just interject? Just because I think your listeners will find this quite fascinating, that the number one risk factor for pain is fear.
Yeah. But I brought that up. Partly brought that up because a lot of your work seems to kind of focus on pain around the signal of threat. I often hear you coming back in what you speak about on talking about how much threat and a body feeling safe orientates pain in the body, whatever. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, how people ascertain what that might mean for them. If we could just, because often we don't even realize that we're threats, perhaps.
Yeah, and thank you again for mentioning this. I think it's such a brilliant, brilliant question, because when I tell people, it's threat signals that are traveling to your brain, and your brain then looks at all these threat signals coming in and then makes a decision. Do you know what? I can't keep my humans safe. I am going to give them pain to slow them down. What we have to remember is that threat signals can come in a multitude of different shapes and sizes. And the example that I always give in the courses that I lead is, your alarm is set to the crack of dawn and you haven't had enough rest, and the loud beep, 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 beep shocks you into a state of wake, and your threat bucket, because we all have different thresholds, fills up a little bit. Then you decide, you know what, I'm going to just whack on the news, see what's happening in the world. And it's really tragic what's going on. And so your threat fills up a bit more. And then you get to work and your boss has a massive fight with you about the fact that you forgot something, and your threat fills up a bit more. And you get home and you've had the worst day and you have a huge argument with your spouse and your threat fills up a bit more. And then you're in a yoga class and the yoga teacher keeps telling you to squeeze your core because your back is so fragile and you could injure yourself. At that point, if you've reached your threshold, your threat bucket then overflows, and the brain then goes, do you know what? I need to utilize some type of safety output to slow my human down, because I don't have the resources to deal with all this threat, and the incoming information is not clear enough for me to make wise decisions to keep my human safe. And that is often when we get these safety outputs that will be elicited. And the reason I'm sharing this is because, again, I've had recently a client who had debilitating back pain. She actually sent me a video of her she's so young, by the way, she's in her 20s, and she could hardly take a few steps before she was crying in pain. And before we hopped on the session, knowing what I know, I just said, what's new for you at the moment? Like, have you got any additional stress at the moment? What's going on outside of just your tissues? And she was like, oh, it's so funny you should mention, because I recently took on 3 new yoga classes. I'm teaching 20 classes a week. I'm cycling all over the place. And on top of that, I decided to do a really, really hard session at the gym. And I was fine after the session at the gym. I felt great. But then I taught the next day another 4 classes. And at the end of the day, my back flared up to the point where I couldn't walk home. And I was like, okay, amazing. I said, when's the last time you had a break? And just took a few days off and did nothing. She said, a really long time. It's been months. And I said, why don't you, before you see me, take a couple of days off and let's see how you do. Anyway, she jumped onto the call, and true as Bob, she was like, I took 2 days off and I feel like amazing. I mean, the pain is still there at like a level 3, but I can walk and I'm getting excited about getting back to work. And so we did a few additional things for her. I'm not going to say we just left at that, but we did actually rehab a bit, and she was great. Off she went. And she was, that was such a huge turnaround. And I'm sharing this with you and your listeners just to give you guys an insight into the fact that whilst that might not be your case for why you are in pain, absolutely not, it is just such a worthwhile factor to consider, because our human bodies are very complex. And I feel like what we've done, even in a holistic practice like yoga and even in physiotherapy, we've put our blinkers on. And when someone's knee is sore, we look at their knee and we tell them to do stuff for their knee. But 99% of the time, their knee is fine. And even if we scan their knee and there's a problem in their knee, that doesn't mean that their knee will be in pain. When we start to address all these different factors, we often see the person's knee pain improve, even though potentially that those degenerative changes are still there. And so two things happen when I start explaining this concept to my listeners on my courses or podcasts. One is you get very frustrated because now there are so many variables to consider. But on the other flip side of it, it's incredibly empowering because now you are looking at the body through a holistic lens. And at last, you don't have these blinkers on, hyper focusing on the area that hurts, when in actual fact, there could be thousands of different things that are contributing to that area being in pain.
I mean, it kind of makes total sense to me in that if it's a generalized symptom like, oh, I've got back pain or I've got a concussion, right? And I'm just kind of thinking, and you have touched upon it, what would you do in specific instances of pain? So I've got this friend, right? And he complains he's got constant fear of his knees, great fear of his knees. And as soon as there's pain, he'll stop doing any yoga practice. He'll stop doing anything because he's just terrified of his knees. And we always say, and he recognises this, there's something emotional about the knees, but they also flare up and do cause him pain, like in the daytime, like if he does things. That's a specific symptom. And he's been to the doctor. The doctor says, well, ostensibly doesn't appear to be anything wrong with you. He can do, well, on a good day, he can do various lotus-esque positions. So it doesn't appear that he's got a tear or anything that's degenerative or changed in the knee tissue. How do you start working with a person in more specific terms then, who has a particular complaint that isn't more of a wide ranging one, let's say, generalized one?
Well, I mean, even in his instance, it's still, there's so many variables to consider. And the first place I would start is by taking their history. And in their history, I will tell them nothing is unimportant. You go back right to the earliest memories and you tell me what are some of the major events that you can think of have happened in your life. And people will come back with usually a very skinny history after I've sent them the form. And I have to then, my job is to probe. I'll be like, so you've never been in a car accident, you've never had a whiplash injury, you've never played contact sports. Have you got any scars on your body? Oh yeah, I had a motorbike accident. That's where I got this big cut in my elbow from. Like, if you've lived a life, you're going to have had some stuff happen to you. And that would guide where I take my rehab. So a lot of practitioners, the knee hurts, they'll focus on the knee and they'll give some drills. And I will do that to a certain degree. But there's so many things we could try. For example, let's say the person has a big scar. Classic for mums, actually, when they've had C-sections. They often haven't actually touched or looked at that scar since the baby has come out. And I'll get them to do hot, cold, sharp, dull, vibration, deep tissue, light touch, all those different sensory stimuli. And what I'll do between each of those is test, retest, test, retest. And the nervous system is lightning fast at telling you what's working and what isn't. And so we'll make a little menu of things. Okay, so for you need vibration on your scar every single day. What else has happened? Oh, we noticed that actually they had a whiplash injury. Okay, you've got knee pain, but you've also had a whiplash injury. And actually, interestingly, when we combine the dots, most of your injuries in your body seem to have come about after that whiplash injury. So we'll rehab the brainstem. We'll give them different types of visual drills or breathing drills to help light up that part of your brain. And again, we test, retest, and we can use several things to test, retest. An easy one is range of motion. I often use walking because walking gives you a little insight into what's happening in someone's brain whilst they're in motion. But another really good one is pain. Like, did that change your pain? Are you on a 10 or are you on a 2? But just to illustrate the point, even if someone has a very specific injury, I will still approach it with a very wide, open lens, and I'll stay very curious because ultimately I don't know. And the worst thing I can do is make an assumption, because as soon as I put my lens on it, oh, I worked with so many people that have had knee pain and this always works. That's when I'm doing the person in front of me a massive disservice. And it's often why clients will come to me and say, I've really been to so many people and they all tell me, I don't know, basic one, my core is weak, but I know it isn't because I've been working at it now for 2 years and I've still got the same issues. And I'll be like, okay, it's because we're barking up the wrong tree. Let's look at you with a wider lens and let's see if there's something we're missing about your unique nervous system and your unique history.
Yeah. I mean, I remember listening to one of your podcasts, and I think the guy you were talking to said, if they come with a symptom, of course I'm going to address it first of all, because it's just respectful. But it's the last place I'm going to look, or something along those lines. And then he proceeded to say something like, I'm going to look at the collarbone, or something like that. You remember that guy?
Yeah,
Very
I do.
keen on the
Dr.
collarbone.
Perry.
Right,
I
Dr.
really,
Perry, that's it.
honestly, if you can ever get him on your show, I highly recommend it because he's such a genius. And his main thing to focus on, and it makes so much sense, is that my main thing is a neuro perspective, because I believe that pain obviously is an output from the brain. So we want to check what the inputs are like. What are your threats? How does your brain process things? And I get really good results with my clients. But at the same time, his philosophy is that if your lymphatic system isn't clearing the waste away from your nerves, and if your cardiovascular system isn't taking nutrients to those nerves are not able to function properly. So his objective is always, let's clear the septic tank out. Let's get the fish tank, all the algae out of it and all the slush and all the goo. Let's put some fresh water into your fish tank so that the system is clean and functioning well. And then we can address all of the neuro aspects to help this person rehab. He gets really, really good results with clients too.
I think the bottom line is no one really can know, can they? You can just try different things. And I think one thing that you're really good on, which I heard you said then, and I hear you repeat a lot, is this kind of idea of testing and retesting to see what's changing, which is, obviously it's a basis of modern science, isn't it? Of science altogether. You have a hypothesis and you test it out. Is it working? Is it working? I mean, I suppose I also hear you kind of talking about all kinds of things that would immediately seem very strange to people, like doing the clicking for the ears, right? Or the eye drawers when you're doing this with the hand. I see you on Instagram doing this kind of thing, Do you want to explain a bit more about the, use of these kind of unusual kind of drills that might help people? Yeah.
I mean, pretty much all the drills that I do are very unusual, but the ones that you're referring to now on the call, they particularly work on the brainstem. And what comes, you have something called the 12 cranial nerves, and 10 of them are in your brainstem. And as you know, this old part of your brain, it actually deals with what we call the autonomics. So the automatic part of your brain, your digestion, your sleep, your urination, your hot, cold, it helps to regulate your body. It also has a strong relationship to the hormones. And so what we can do is actually, if someone, particularly if they've had a whiplash injury, actually, it's so worth addressing the brainstem. But also our brains don't just go through trauma and therefore the brain struggles to process information. The brain can also struggle with something called disuse atrophy, which means if you don't use it, you lose it. And many people are on their phones a lot. They do the same practice every day. They walk the same route to work every day. They don't really make their brain sweat. So their brain doesn't need to form new neurons. And as a result, the brain actually starts to shrink. And that can be very threatening for the brain because it doesn't know how to handle a complex, wide variety of situations. So to give color to what you have alluded to, when we talk about the brainstem, we can actually tweak these 10 cranial nerves. We can give people vision drills, breathing drills, vestibular drills. We can stick their tongue into the cheek. We can move their jaw around. We can move their face in funny ways. We can click in the ear that has potentially less hearing. And we retest between each of the cranial nerve stimulations. And it's really fascinating. And I'll tell you a quick story. I had an elderly gentleman who had terribly sore knees, long-standing history of arthritis. And he did a little squat as his test. And he was, it hurts. Oh, it's level six pain. And I said to him, okay, which side is your better hearing side? And we tested which side. And the side that had less hearing, we did 20 clicks in that ear. And he retested, and I'll never forget the look on his face. What have you done? What have you done? And he did the most beautiful for him. Obviously, you can imagine he was elderly and he hadn't squatted in decades. But he did this beautiful little squat, and he's like, it's only on a level 1. How did you do that? I've just clicked in my ear. He was so blown away by the transformation being that quick for him. And I tell the story just to illustrate that This is why I keep a very open mind when dealing with clients, because we don't know what is contributing to someone's threat. We don't know unless we test which parts of the brain are understimulated. We have to go through this rigorous process of testing. And then that was his homework, okay? Like when you're out and about and you feel your knees get sore, you click in your ear, or if you're wearing your earphones, just listen to your music in the one side to help your brain start to just wake up again. Everyone's brains are slowly shrinking because we just do the same boring stuff all the time.
But also, you can understand in terms of the yogic psychology that you've got these vasanas or samskaras of pain or pleasure, haven't you? And the neurons are just naturally very used to firing together. And so as soon as you feel a little tweak in that place where you have that habitual pain, the brain is so used to kind of feeding that kind of pathway that it goes straight there. Or the same, with any kind of addictive behavior as well. So it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I don't know whether you use any visualizations or any kind of mental work, if you do,
definitely.
that would be great to hear. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the cerebellum is again an old part of your brain, which is incredibly important for your function as a human. The most abbreviated, watered down version of its function is the ABC, accuracy, balance, and coordination. And the reason why I mention that is because the reason why I say that's a watered down version of what it does is because it does so many things. Oh my gosh, it deals with gravity and emotions and processing, and it's just fascinating. And the cerebellum particularly is a center that deals, well, what it likes to do is it likes to anticipate what's going to happen, and it's an error corrector. So if it has a visualization of what it's about to embark on, it's really helpful because then the cerebellum can cross-check what's happening versus the visualization. And then it can be like, okay, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. Let's correct it because it's an error corrector. So the reason I'm mentioning this fascinating part of your brain is because a lot of people have got cerebellar deficits. Again, you don't use it, you lose it. And what we can do is help somebody get better by visualizing them moving well, by visualizing them performing the task well. But the other reason why I want to talk about visualization is because very often when we are working with clients, we are hyper-focused on what's wrong. And that can sometimes really help hold people back. And I'll tell you another quick story. I was working with a client who had a bad shoulder. And she said to me, do you know, the physio that she's seeing at the moment has said the word dislocation about 50 times in her last session. And how weak she is and how she's going to dislocate her shoulder if she keeps doing yoga. And I said to her, okay, well, first of all, you're not going to dislocate your shoulder. Your shoulder is very strong and very resilient. And the fact that you're still doing yoga is an amazing, amazing thing. Like, let's focus on what you can do. So what is it that you can do right now that feels really good? And she was listing it all out. And I said, okay, and now I want you to imagine what you want to be able to do and tell me about what you want to be able to do. And she was like, I want to do pincher and handstand and flip the grip. And she was listing it all out. And I was like, okay, let's focus on that. Let's make that where you're aiming your focus as opposed to you focusing on the dislocation and the fact that you're weak. And actually, when I assessed her, she was very stable and she wasn't weak at all. So I feel like people attach to what they know and trust as therapists and teachers. And that's why we really have to keep, again, I keep saying the same thing, keep a very open mind when you're working with clients. And, I'm classic. I was so stuck in my ways as well as a physio, and people would come to me after class with a knee or a back pain. I'll be, your glutes, it's because your glutes are weak. And I would really beat that drum to death. And then I started learning about the brain and I thought back and I was like, some of those people were really strong and their glutes were fine. And actually me telling them that was actually just making them think that there was something wrong with their body when actually their body was perfectly fine and their body was just choosing that output in the right time at the right place to help them be safe. And so my language now has differed vastly. If someone comes to me and they're like, oh, this hurts, I'm like, okay, what do you do that feels good? And again, we'll let them focus on that. And I'll actually ask them to demonstrate things that they do when they're in pain that like, oh, do you wiggle around the pain or do you move into it? Like, it doesn't matter what the answer is. Just tell me, what do you do? Just to gain an understanding of how they move and how they engage with different activities. But absolutely, the whole concept of visualization is not just this conscious thing of I'm seeing a picture in my mind moving, but actually you are creating deep wiring that your body will refer back to.
Actually finding this quite inspiring. Thanks.
And it's funny you say that.
It does give you more kind of a perspective on it, that it's not just, okay, I feel the pain, something's wrong, it's going to get worse, like, better go see the doctor. What about a kind of, an MRI scan, et cetera, et cetera. Because, I think even medical science is kind of waking up to the fact that, they don't really, they can see that, damaged tissue, but as you mentioned at the start, that it's widely acknowledged now. It doesn't mean that it needs operating, or doesn't mean that it might, correct itself or cause pain or not cause pain. It's there's more to it than that. Yeah.
So much. It's fascinating. Yeah. They did these great studies, which I'm sure you've heard of, the large scale study, 3,600 samples, and they made sure that every person in the sample had no pain. And then they were ranging from ages from 20 all the way through to their 70s. And what they found when they scanned these people's bodies is that every single age bracket had degenerative changes in varying degrees. Like the younger population had less and the older population had more degenerative changes, but none of these people had pain. So it begs the question, does degenerative changes result in pain as an absolute? And the answer is absolutely not. Like, there are a lot of people with a lot of stuff going on and they're absolutely fine. There's also some other really cool studies, like they put a rubber hand on the table, and then the person puts their hand under the table.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then they stroke the rubber hand. And at the same time, they're stroking the person under the table. And then all of a sudden, they'll take a hammer out, bash the person's rubber hand. And every single time without fail, the person will scream in agony. And they say they felt the pain.
Yeah. That's a good one, isn't it? Yeah. And referring back to something you said earlier about Leslie Kaminoff, who you were on the call with when we did the discussion on injury. He says, we start from the fact you've got more good going on from you now than bad, because I think it's so easy to focus on the pain and think, well, I can't do anything anymore. I can't do my practice. Everything's wrong with me. Like, and I think there's this narrative now. It's almost swung from one direction to the other in yoga, where originally it was a bit gung-ho, perhaps. Certainly, in the field that I'm in, Ashtanga, it's like, people are just kind of like getting crazy adjustments, and there was no idea about kind of the more therapeutic aspect of healing the body, and now maybe more towards this kind of narrative of fragility, that everything is a danger, and got to be safe, and you don't want to hurt yourself, or the constantly use of these kind of terms in the yoga class. Although with the best will in the world, I know that teachers are wanting, their students to be safe and not be injured or injure themselves. It can easily put the thought into people's heads and create, situations which may make people start to feel pain.
Absolutely. We have to remember that the brain is a highly suggestive organ that's constantly scanning the environment for threats. So if you have someone who you have put on a quote unquote pedestal, because obviously your yoga teacher is obviously someone you respect very much, and you really listen to them because they've walked the path before you and you're trying to get to where they are in some ways with the practice. When someone tells you things like, don't do X because Y will happen, you really trust that what they're saying is the truth. And so if you start to formulate or start to believe these statements like the knee going beyond the ankle will, they'll put strain on your knee. Or if you don't do a flexed foot in pigeon, you're going to damage your ligaments. Or if you don't engage your core, you're going to put strain on your back. Like, it's just not true. Like, the body is so incredibly resilient. And we know this because we watch babies move around. They have their little pot bellies hanging out, and they sit in the W legs, and they do going in all sorts of little shapes that we're always telling people not to do. And they are absolutely fine and thriving and rocking. And they just don't have this concept of fear in their bodies that has been drilled into us.
Yeah. And I think as you get older, that obviously that increases that sense of fear in your body, right? I don't know whether you've heard of the work of Bernie Clark. And he's on the podcast, and he's a good one to, he's a kind of more physically oriented person, but he's a good one to chat to. And he mentioned with their knee over the foot in Warrior, something like, the stress that you'd have to have on your knee for anything to go wrong there would just be like £1,000 or something. Like people did, on cadavers, they got the ligament out and they measured it, and how, and it would take like, thousands of pounds worth of stress. So there's all this bogus information, Another guy who's good with that, who I know would be Dr. Yogi. He wrote that book, and he debunks loads of these kind of things that yoga teachers throw out all the time. You can't do that because you'll kill your shoulders. You can't do that. The other thing I was going to say before I pass it back to you, which is an interesting one you might be interested in. Bernie Clark mentioned this study. I don't know if you've heard of this. They did an arthroscopy. Well, they didn't do it. They had a group needed the arthroscopy. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah.
And they did two two little holes, like, because I've had one. You have two little holes, one the microscope, one the tools. And some people had it. Some people didn't have it. They just had the holes drilled and nothing else. And some people had it washed out. Right, just holes drilled in, wash it out with a saline solution, sew it back together. All experienced the same result. That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and these studies, although it feels unethical because obviously we're tapping into placebo.
Yeah, it's a bit, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, no. I think they're great. I think let's focus on the fact that placebo is still in effect. Like everyone's like, oh, it's placebo effect. I'm like, hello, it's still in effect. Focus on the fact that we didn't have to do an operation to get people better.
Yeah.
Focus on the fact that they didn't have to take any drugs. Like, this is fantastic. We should be encouraging this and learning more about it and really trying to tap into the power of this, as opposed to vilifying it as something. I'm using the word unethical because that's what it was called when I was at university. They said that it was placebo. If we give, like doctors giving their patients sugar pills to help them with their pain, that was unethical. And I understand the premise behind that. And please don't misunderstand me. I agree. But at the same time, the lack of curiosity around that for me is baffling, because it's really something we should be learning more about.
It just makes you think, if you go into hospital for an operation, and now everyone's going to think, did they really ever do it or not? Or am I some kind of, have I just got the holes?
They did. They did. If you're not in a study, they definitely did it. And especially because my experience in working with surgeons is they love to cut a body open. And sometimes we'd be there, like as physios, pleading with the surgeon over a case, being like, this person, we've got way more conservative methods that we can use to help rehab this person. And they are like, no, we have to cut them open. And I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, it's just how they're trained.
I think things are changing, though.
That's
good. I'm going to ask you a question in a second about Western medicine and the current ways that they're treating and how you're treated. But I'm going to share this little thing with you because I think they are changing. Right, recently I had an MRI on my hip. It's been causing me pain for like now 10 or 15. I reckon it's always been causing me pain, the right hip. And what it found is that apparently I had a trauma to the hip. Well, I don't even remember. They said you had a trauma to the hip. And you've got necrosis on the femur now. They've got a necrosis on the, and the people that did the MRI, they said, basically you're in line from a hip replacement, right? That's on the cards, maybe not now. And I say, I'm in good shape. I don't have pain, I have pain, but it's not, I don't have pain at night. I don't have pain, like generally, I'm limping a bit, but, like that's, I'm 45, but, and that made me feel like when I had that when they said that, obviously I felt like, oh God, I felt more pain. And then recently I spoke to this guy, a surgeon, about the whole thing, like, what do you think about this going forward? And he said, look, that's the last thing we know, really, it's the last thing down the line that I'm ever going to do any surgery on you. That's the last thing I want to do,
Good.
So I was like,
I'm so happy.
Yeah. And since then, he said, yes, you've got this situation with the bone itself having a lack of, fluid in it or whatever situation is happening with it. But essentially the tiles he described like tiles on the top, so you've got the concrete underneath. The concrete is a bit dodgy, but the tiles and the grouting is still fine.
Oh, amazing. What a legend.
You don't have any fundamental reason why we need to do anything at this stage whatsoever, and subsequent to that, this last week, I have to say, I've been feeling a lot less pain in that hip just for that consultation, So anyway,
you see how powerful it is, the language that we use. And if you're a yoga teacher listening, I want you to know that you carry this power. Like everyone thinks it's the doctor or the surgeon that carries this power, but day to day, it's the yoga teacher that sees the student more frequently, and you carry the same power. So remind your students that they are so resilient and that they they are able to cope with huge amounts of physical, mental, and emotional stress, and they will come out the other side better for it because they will have adapted to harsher and harsher environments. And in the meantime, if your body is speaking to you and giving you signals, just take a little moment to listen and to remind it you'll do everything in your power to support it. And just on your note about looking at scans and feeling worse, I mean, there is actually clinical data to back that up with scientific studies that were done, that people who were shown their scans and people who were not shown their scans, the people who were shown their scans, actually their healing is reduced and their chances of getting better decline. So these days, many doctors opt out for not showing scans to the patients, but giving them a written report only. And I think even the written report, we should be careful with the language we use in there, but that's for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, referring to Bernie Clark, I think he was saying on the podcast, look, like over 30 years old, everyone has like tears in the, some tear in the meniscus or, kind of like tear in the shoulder, over 40 years old, that's 60% over, like it's going up and up. So, we've all got these things. It's just a question of whether they cause pain or not, and
Exactly.
having them pointed out on the scan, this is what it is. Obviously, it concretes that possibility that, I've got something wrong with me. And to your point of giving the power away to an authority, and we have huge respect, naturally speaking, for the surgeon, to the doctor, to the healthcare practitioner, to the yoga teacher. But at the end, giving away is, in some respects, giving away one's power to the authority to tell you, how you're going to do and how you're going to, exist with that.
When you're in pain, though, you are desperate. There can be a sense of desperation, and also there's a sense of searching. It's normal and it's natural to look to the environment around you, look on the internet, ask for people's experiences, ask the doctors, ask the yoga teachers, for advice, because you ultimately also don't want to make things worse. So I understand where people are coming from. That is why it's so important for all these people, these touch points, to have empowering language, to talk about how resilient you are, and at the same time to give tangible tools for people to use. And this is why I'm so passionate about teaching people about the brain, because that pain that you're feeling is not from those tissues. And I know it's a bit of it's like stepping into out of the matrix, like you've taken the red pill and now you're in like some floaty universe, because it's hard to understand that the pain in your knee is not in your knee. I get that. But that isn't how pain works. Pain is not where you feel it. It's an output chosen by the brain. So if we can learn about the brain and we can learn about all the different things that it needs to not choose pain, we can make people better faster.
I think also the classic problem with Western medicine is looking at the symptom and the cause, or the effect and the cause, as the same thing. Whereas obviously, knee pain, it's generally referred, like a pain somewhere is obviously got a root or a relationship to other areas, right? It's not like, I've got knee pain because of a problem with my knee, just my knee. It's like, there's always going to be other causes coming to a cumulative effect, isn't there? So how do you find generally that this kind of what you're talking about tessellates with a Western understanding of pain and preventative care? Because you talked about people being worried about causing themselves further damage. Now, I can imagine someone coming to you and say, well, I like what you're doing and I kind of have a hope that it will cure me, but I'm also worried that I'm doing a practice or doing this thing and I don't know whether this pain or injury I'm feeling is going to be exacerbated if I don't get kind of Western healthcare professional advice on this. How do you envisage the two tessellating together?
Well, I mean, this is very Western healthcare advice because it's highly well studied. It's just very new. So there's not a lot of people who are utilizing functional neurology in pain management yet, but it is definitely changing. There's definitely a lot more people that are utilizing this as a tool. If someone wants to have a more traditional approach, then they need to definitely do that. They need to strengthen their muscles and their joints. But as I mentioned before, 90% of the clients that I see have tried that and haven't had results. So they have tried a more traditional approach with their rehab and they're still struggling. And obviously the body takes like 6 to 8 weeks to heal, depending on where the injury is. So if they are still in pain beyond that time scale, then there's something else going on. It's not tissue related. And that's important to remember as well.
Finally, what about diet? Do you talk to them about diet at all? That surely must be related.
So I'm not someone who specializes in that field, so I don't want to say too much, but I do know that everybody's different and everybody will need a different approach to how they assimilate their nutrients. It is a threat marker that I will ask about in my clinic, and I'll just check that people are eating enough and that they're getting all the different right nutrients for their bodies. And there's also some really fascinating genetic not diseases, but genetic conditions like MTHFR, gene mutation, where actually people haven't got the ability to convert folic acid into its usable form. And so if they're eating a vegan or vegetarian diet, they're eating a lot of crops, and crops are often sprayed with folic acid. So if they're having an overloaded system, we do see them deal with a lot of stuff like anxiety, gut issues, problematic skin, issues with their liver. Sometimes that will then represent as systemic pain in different areas of their body, particularly their joints. So I do ask about these things, but it's not my area of specialism. And so I don't want to comment too broadly on it, but I do want to say that it's such an important thing, and don't ever think there's only one right diet for everybody out there. If you're eating a whole food diet, that's the first step. And the second step is, if you have got a specific dietary lens that you're viewing the world from, please never impose that on anyone else. And I'm saying that as a hardcore ex-vegan that was like really preaching it like vigilantically through the world, because I've recognized my own body didn't respond very well to that. And after a long time, I became quite sick off the back of that diet. So I had to make quite hard for my ethics decisions. I had to make different changes. And in that growth phase, I realized you can never prescribe one thing for all people.
How shall we end this? I mean, is that maybe like how would you, if someone comes to you and says, okay, I've got it, like, as I said, like, just a hypothetical, I've got a concussion on my head, or what's a common thing these days? Dizziness. People are complaining a lot with dizziness. I've got my own theories on that, but we won't go there. But it's a very common complaint, and I still suffer a little bit from dizziness. How would you, how would you start, just to get a kind of picture of how you would, because as you say, you're not a specialist on diet, but you kind of have to be a specialist in the way that you're suggesting when we look at the body. Kind of everything. You're a generalist in everything. So
generalist,
you're looking at so many different symptoms.
Dizziness.
Walk me through the kind of tick list of what things you check on someone.
So dizziness screams vestibular issues. And so that is your middle ear. It is an interoceptive signal that comes to your brain, telling your brain which way is up and what direction you're moving. There are 5 organs on each side of your head, so 10 in total, 3 semicircular canals and 2 otolith organs. The semicircular canals send spinning motions and the otolith organs linear acceleration. And so I would test all of those to check which one has a deficit. And then I'd give you homework to help build up the signals, the action potential in those areas to help build up your resilience in that, because it's very common, but it's not normal to have dizziness.
So you can actually test those without any medical kit, can you? By doing basic kind of... Right.
Yeah, it's quite easy, actually. It's quite easy. Once you know how, you're like, oh, actually, that's... like, I say it's easy. When you're just learning it, you're like, oh my God, this is so complicated. How am I ever going to learn this? And then after a few goes and after you've tested it a few times, you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. And then it's really, really smooth. And it's just amazing the results you can get with people. And gosh, they're on all these different medications, which actually is often in the side effects is dizziness.
Which dizziness is dizziness. Yeah, along with death, probably the most 2 common factors in it. If you read your
if you read the contraindications, and
death
so
and dizziness.
Death and dizziness. So I'll test all the different canals, all the otolith organs, and I'll check that they're all functioning properly. And if they're not, I'll just give them little drills. I mean, it's very common for people to have deficits because, as I said, if you don't use it, you lose it. And people just live such bland lives that people just sit down and they do the same practice every day. And they don't even move their head around in space as they would if they were in nature. Like if you imagine being in nature and hunting for food, or gathering, you'd be crawling under and looking up and looking around you, and your head would be in motion all the time because you're scanning the environment for danger. And we're just forwards all day long.
Well, kind of down.
Forwards and down. Forwards and down.
Look at the phone. Yeah. But yeah.
It's just
But I think we're maybe limited to what we were, but we've probably evolved into it as well. So to be fair, it was a while ago that we were foraging and hunting and gathering. I reckon there's been some evolution.
But
yeah.
There has been, but if you look on the timeline of existence, it's been very short. If you look at how long evolution takes to actually kick into place, we and remember, evolution is neither good nor bad; it just is. So we could be evolving in a way that actually doesn't serve us. And that's why there's so many teething issues along the way. Adaptation is neither good nor bad; it just is, and you're adapting right the second, as well as on a macro level as a population every time a new baby is born.
All right. So, by the way, it was Alexander the Great, basically. What happened with Alexander the Great, to the start of our chat, is he went over to India. He was the first person to see yogis performing in India. And then he took a guru. Right, he had a yoga guru when he was in India with his troops, right? He conquest, but he never conquered India. And then when he left, they stayed a while, I think, the Greeks, a couple of years in India, a number of years. Anyway, someone will probably correct me, as they always do. And when he left, his yogi guru, to show respect or to show his mastery, self-immolated. He went on the fire and he set fire to himself, and he was fine. He wasn't fine. He burned to death, obviously, but he wasn't showing any signs of pain. That was the whole point of the start, and the blather that I was blathering on about the start. Anyway, to just end up, I usually do the guilty pleasure and the inspiration, but in this case, well, maybe we could do that. You seem excited about that now, but in this case, I thought we could do the. What's the biggest factor in pain resolution that you see, or contribution, let's say, and the biggest surprise in all of this, in all of the study, because I know you've really committed yourself to studying this, that you've seen. So maybe you round it off.
The biggest thing that can help people is just to keep moving.
Right.
If you are in pain, don't stop moving. I'm not saying do the same thing. I'm saying do something different. Please don't just keep doing the same practice if you're in, your body's telling you something's not right. Do something different, but don't stop moving, because movement is medicine. It's a cliche that really comes from great truth. We see the spiral. People are afraid, they stop moving, so they become weaker, so they become in more pain. So they stop moving even more. Then they become in even more pain, and they get stuck in this negative spiral. Just keep moving. Your body is so resilient. It will heal. Try something different. Don't get stuck in your ways. Don't think that there's only one correct way to move. There isn't. Move in creative, unusual ways. Your brain requires novelty to keep thickening. So I hope that's inspiration for your community.
Excellent. Yeah. What about what was the other one? The biggest surprise, something that surprised you most in studying all this field?
It has been all a massive surprise. I want to pick out one thing, but let me tell you, when I started working with people, and my traditional physiotherapy schooling had really pushed me in the direction of obsessing over biomechanics, and suddenly I'm clicking in an old man's ear and they can squat better. That was revolutionary, to understand that you can tap into the different parts of the brain. You can tweak them within a couple of seconds and you can get such a huge change. I mean, and the letters of appreciation from the clients of being like, I can't thank you enough. It has been such a hard journey, and now I know that all I was missing was sticking my tongue in my left cheek. Just to give you a random example, these little tiny tweaks that suddenly you light up the brain in a new way, and the brain's like, that's what I needed. Thank you at last.
I think easy as yoga practitioners to pay lip service this. Oh, the body's so subtle, or energy and whatever. But when you actually see it and you realize how holistic and subtle the whole thing is, it's still surprising, isn't it? It's like
definitely.
Okay, you wanted the guilty pleasure. You can go ahead and give me a guilty pleasure. What is it? Study. Don't say study, because I know you're always studying stuff. What do you do when you're not sitting with your books?
What am I doing? My guilty pleasure.
Salsa dancing or something.
I'm obsessed with kite surfing.
Oh, really?
I'm a
Ah.
keen kite surfer, and I've just learned how to do these little jumps, which hopefully are going to get a bit taller. I'm struggling to land them consistently, so that is
You
what
got to
I
put that on
do.
your Instagram.
I know, I
Have you?
have done. I have done.
Have
I have
you?
a
Okay, I
couple of
haven't seen it.
videos
Right,
on
I'm
there.
going to watch out now. Right,
You're
okay.
scrolling. Today's scrolling.
Yeah. Where do you do that in the UK then? Because you're not in London.
I sometimes go down to Kent, but I've done all over
Right.
the world, from Bermuda
Okay.
to South Africa. I've kite surfed Mauritius, like all over the world.
That's a good one. I'll give you that. At least it's not chocolate. All right, Celeste. Thanks so much for your chat today. It's been an absolute pleasure. You can find all the stuff about Celeste in the notes below, and yeah, do get in touch with her. She's a wealth of information and pulls it from many places. And look at the podcast as well. She's got a great podcast, Science Love at First Science. That's the name of it. And the book that eludes me now.
I love
the
your
book
sense
I'm gonna
of
read,
humor.
So you gotta read that book as well. So yeah, thank you again, Celeste. It's lovely to have
Thanks,
you on.
Adam.
Thank you.